All right. I'm here with Pallavi Golla, and she
Yes.
is a professional EOS implementer. How's it going, Pallavi?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. I'm
Awesome.
excited to unpack your success. But before we get there, let's talk about your background. What got you
Yeah.
started in business and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, sure. I was grew up in Pittsburgh, went to NYU for undergrad. I was a finance major. I came from a family of doctors and somehow figured out during a summer camp that I was never going to be a doctor. And I really loved business and economics and all the things that went along with it. I went to NYU for undergrad, majored in finance, worked on Wall Street for 5 years at hedge funds. And during that time was really analyzing companies and really getting digging into their financials and giving them, I guess, information or suggestions on how they should run their company, and figured out that, looking at a spreadsheet and running a company is not the optimal way to run a business, but rather diving in and actually operating a business is really the side of business that I wanted to be on. Um, and so I kind of took the leap and started my first company, went back to business school. And the first company I started was called Vine Lust. After working in the restaurant industry for a little bit, figured out that there is a huge market for connecting millennials with smaller wineries. And so Vinelust was the D2C e-commerce option for new consumers within the market. This was in 2011, who wanted to, kind of experiment with wine. And our goal was to connect smaller wineries with a new consumer, which was this millennial new wine drinker at the time. So started that business, scaled it over a few years, and found that being a third party retailer of wine had its challenges. Ended up having a meeting with my biggest competitor. At the time, it was called Club W. It changed its name to Wink Wines. It was a very fast growing VC funded company. I was in an accelerator at the time, and they basically said, "What are you doing with your business? Because we're seeing these challenges being a third party retailer of wine." And I said, "Yeah, I'm seeing the same margin challenges and cost structure issues." And they said, "Why don't we combine forces and grow this thing together? We have capital to actually change from being a third party retailer of wine to a producer of wine." And so I really came on board because I had a wine background and a business background to build out what would be, I guess, the first direct to consumer winery
God,
under Wink Brands. Yeah.
nice. Yeah, I've heard of Wink before,
Yeah.
actually. That's really cool. So you do a kind of stint at Wink,
Yeah.
and how long were you there before you started your next thing?
Yeah, I was there for a year and a half. So I built my company for 2 years. Then we
Hmm.
kind of merged those companies. They bought our technology, they bought some of our assets and our customer list. Worked for them for a year and a half during a really high growth period. I was employee number 8, working in, a shared office space. And we grew to 100 employees over that year and a half. So they had raised $40 million in VC capital funding just to build out that production arm. And so it was a wild ride. I worked for serial entrepreneurs. I feel like they took my business idea and they really did it the right way, or the way I would have wanted to do it. And so I learned a lot there, working on the senior leadership team. At the end of the day, I knew it wasn't my own, and I know I'm an entrepreneur at heart. And so I moved back to Pittsburgh with my husband, had our first child, and that's when I started my next venture, which was Lark. And it's an activewear brand for babies and women. And we use a proprietary fabric based on bamboo um, to help keep families more comfortable.
Very cool. Very
Yeah.
cool. So the founding story there was you're back in Pittsburgh. Do you find a couple co-founders solo? Do you raise money? How did that
Yeah,
kick off?
I've always been a solopreneur. I've always bootstrapped my businesses. And so, had my first child, figured out that activewear was a huge industry, but all of the clothing being made was being made from synthetic fabrics. At first, I thought, hey, let me just make kids wear out of this synthetic fabric, dry fit material. And I quickly realized that those materials are like doused with chemicals that are bad for our own endocrine systems, but definitely not safe to put on children. So I kind of went on this year and a half journey to find a safe material that was unique to the market. to base my line off of, and stumbled on this thing that we ended up calling Soft Tech bamboo cotton blend that had the same properties that a dry fit would have. So it was moisture wicking, sun safe, um, performance fabric, but all natural with no chemicals. And then kind of proceeded to do a Kickstarter and start a business. And, over 4 years, what started in the spare bedroom of my house with me using an LA manufacturer ended up being a multi-million-dollar business that had Asian manufacturing arm and grew kind of to a team of 10. But I think the success of our brand was predicated on really great products that were unique, but also building this community around families and providing not only the products that they needed and products that made their children more comfortable, but also all of the other things that parents were looking for, that community, a brand that they understood. I was kind of on social media a lot, building that community, that trusted community of consumers that stayed loyal to us. So I think focusing on those things over a few years is what enabled us to bootstrap the business, become profitable, and kind of do all the right things to make our story a success in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you mentioned it a couple times there about community and social media. And I think it's an incredible time for people out there that can start on Instagram and get themselves set up to the point where they're literally selling through these
Yeah.
platforms. And I guess one kind of segue here would be around the community part of how you started building that out. Did you, as you started seeing sales increase and you were developing that community, did you hire someone to manage that? Did you manage that yourself all the way through? And what point did you kind of delegate that, if so?
Yeah, great question. Very early on, I knew that I wasn't great at writing copy or making posts. And that was in 2016 when posts were the format of what you needed. And so, went to my local college, got a couple young kids to be my interns, paid interns, because I believe in paying interns. And they were kind of behind the scenes of making sure that we were consistent in our messaging. But as time, the voice and the community and how we built that into kind of a 90,000 person following is um, kind of the strategy was mine, but I always had someone helping me execute that. As Instagram evolved from being just posts to stories, I think that's when the community really took form. And I was on that platform a lot, telling our story, sharing the behind the scenes, getting people excited about new products, getting customer feedback. And for me, that relationship with our customers, our perceived relationship and connection to the brand, I think really benefited us in building this loyal community of people that felt like they were part of something bigger and helping to build something bigger. And I think um, that honesty and transparency with our customers went a long way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's truly remarkable the brands that I've seen grassroots grow from, 0 to 50, 100,000 people on there and hyper engaged. They're collaborating with influential people on these platforms. And it's a beautiful thing where distribution's built in. And it's
Yeah.
so cool that that's possible now for virtually, just the time it takes to build that and spend time curating. So really, really fascinating. And the stories came out. You guys, are you selling on, primarily through Instagram? Did you start running paid ads, and how did that kind of distribution scale up to multi-million?
Yeah, I think that we were always building this community of loyal followings, and our goal was to attract the right people, but we were also doing paid ads. Email was 40% of our revenue. I think it was a holistic storytelling approach. And even with our ads, we were always trying to do creative things. And I think to be honest, timing is a big part of it too, because at some point, if I had started this business in 2021, I think the ad landscape would have been different as well. But we were kind of right to take advantage of a great ad landscape. Instagram stories really coming into a more popular format where we could really connect with customers, but then also using email to round it out and do all of the traditional marketing efforts that reminded
Mhm.
people of new launches and sales and all those things.
Nice, nice. So let's kind of fast forward through how big did the team scale up to the point
Yeah,
of
so we had a team of 10 when I sold it at the end of last year, so it took 7 years. Again, we were bootstrapping the business, so we didn't have venture funding, um, and really relied on kind of keeping the operation profitable. So it just meant that we had very little. We had to be very pragmatic, and strategic about how we grew the company and where we spent.
got it? And when it comes to like KPIs, the things that you're tracking, obviously revenue is
Yeah,
huge, but were there
sure.
other key performance indicators you guys were tracking as you were going along? Profitability sounds like it was pretty key there, but what other things were you guys monitoring?
Yeah, I mean, I think profitability, whenever you're an inventory heavy business, what are your inventory turns? How quickly are you going through product? Kind of inventory management metrics are really important to us. Um, in addition to site metrics. So like, basket size, how do we get more people or those same consumers to come back more often? And that often meant that we had to have more collections more frequently. And, driving data was certainly the driver of all of our decisions, and how we wanted to grow the business. And that those, kind of data points or KPIs is what led us to into the adult market too, because we knew margins would be bigger. We're talking to the same audience. How do we capture more if they love our product? How do we capture more of their spend and create products that would serve their needs? Um, and by the time I sold the business, women's wear was 40% of our business, and it was started out as as a baby line, that
Uh-huh.
only went up to 2 years old.
Uh-huh. Cool, cool. So let's kind of get to the deal itself.
Yeah.
How did those conversations begin initially?
Yeah, so I guess if we can take a step back, why did I want to sell the business maybe is an important factor, because I think there's a lot of things that drive people to sell their business. I was at a point where I was bootstrapping the company, and in May of 2022, I kind of had a term sheet from in some investors that could help me scale the business. We were going to raise $1.5 million. We had the full amount committed, and then our lead investor dropped out. And so, in an inventory heavy business, we had already kind of committed to production. So, losing that investor, especially due to market conditions, kind of like if you remember, May of 2022 was a tough time in the in the stock market and in kind of VC market. And so it left us scrambling, to be honest. And so we knew we had capital commitments to our manufacturer that we had to kind of commit to. In June of 2022, I decided to just be very transparent with our customers and say we were kind of in a unique situation. We did this fire sale where we raised $400,000 just through selling inventory to kind of give us a chance at surviving, to be honest. Um, and our customers really rallied, which was amazing. And then at that point, I had to decide, could I raise another fund? Where does this business go from here? Am I going to kind of look inwards, make it a smaller business, take it back to that smaller, more profitable business? Or am I going to try to do the same thing over again, raise another round and scale the business even further? Um, I actually just closed down the site for 2 months while I was figuring it out, because we had sold all this inventory. We were really low on inventory, and I was like, "I just need to pause and figure out what I wanted from this business." I'm the sole owner, solopreneur. I was working my ass off, and it was actually at that point that I decided that I was gonna sell the business. And so in August of 2022, I came back to my customers. I was like, "Hey, this thing's for sale." And I told all of my networks that I was selling my business, and really just ran my own process, like created my own sales deck. Now, I spoke to a few business brokers and investment bankers, but honestly, I had a lot of inbound interest. And so I vetted like 20 different buyers that came to me, um, and ultimately had three serious buyers. And I can go through the profiles of those buyers, but I can't talk about numbers due to a
Yeah,
an NDA. But one of them was $100 million baby company that was interested in a more premium brand. And so I would come on as the CEO of that brand with a loyalty stream kind of, ongoing revenue structure, salary, and some upfront cash. The second one, they only wanted part of our business, which was our sleepwear business, which was a large part of our business. And they only wanted to buy that portion and then rebrand it into something that was their own. And then the ultimate buyer wanted all of our business. They were serial entrepreneurs. They were owned by a few different families, and they really saw the value of what I had created, the community that I created. They were thinking about starting something within this space, and they knew that they could build upon what I had built instead of starting from scratch. And so it was the third buyer that I ended up moving forward with after a lot of due diligence and obviously discussions.
Nice, nice. And I think it's a great example of the importance of having the community initially, is like
Yeah.
putting it out there publicly, being very transparent and saying, hey, this is the situation. And I think that's a beautiful thing, being able to shop it around, even because those serious buyers knew that happened.
Yeah.
So there's competition just baked in there, that that it's
Yeah.
publicly out there. And that's a really empowering concept that is ultimate leverage when you're talking to these suitors that are coming to you and saying like, hey, I'm interested. But very, very cool. So let's talk about preparedness. You mentioned
Hmm.
diligence. What types of tips can you share for listeners around preparing your business for that diligence with those buyers?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, just obviously paying for the accountant and the bookkeeper and all of those things that keep your financials in order is really important because I mean, as you're even growing your business, I always built the business as something bigger than what it was and had my ducks in a row. And I think that's really important because that can get away from you, especially as a solopreneur or, when you're in building phase. Um, you know, Documentation of how we did things and the processes and, our social calendars. There was a lot of process in place for our team, even though it was small. And I think that's helpful to showcase how it's transferable to someone else. Um, and I would say, our manufacturer. So in addition to the community, I think what was also very valuable to the eventual buyers was our manufacturing and supply chain. And so again, keeping really strong relationships with those partners and that evolution over 4 years, because we started that partnership with our, current manufacturer in 2019, how our interactions throughout that whole process, right? And keeping those engagements and relationships positive really helped to push the deal forward because they were reliable and they had good things to say about how we were running the business. I had good things to say about how they were helping us and partnering with us to run the business. And so I think across the board, I guess the theme is relationship management and process
Uh,
and
yeah.
keeping those things in mind so that it's doesn't look like a mess when people take on, or
Mhm.
take over your business.
And for all the DTC entrepreneurs listening, what can you share about how you derived valuation? Was it trailing trailing 12 months? Was it forward looking? How did you personally go about it when you were talking to these potential buyers?
Yeah, I was generally trailing 12 months. And there, and also kind of in my deck, I wasn't sure how certain buyers, what they would want out of the business. So I laid out like email lists, website, what is the value of each of these assets in addition to our revenue, and really painted a picture for them. Like we have social media, we have email lists. How do we derive revenue? All of these assets that were key to our success. Really wanted to paint a clear picture of the brand that we built. They're buying a brand. And then also the unique supply chain and manufacturing um, components, and those two together created some value. So I really did break out a value and placed a value on everything that we were selling, knowing that potentially there was that buyer that didn't want anything to do with our brand and solely wanted our manufacturing and just wanted to rebrand our product because they liked our product. And on the flip side, showcasing to the eventual buyers, hey, all of these things are of value. You get a lot of value from the community, from the Facebook, from the brand, from our trademarks. And so I listed out and gave a value to those. And I did consult with some other people, on how to value those things. But I think they were taken at face value with very little negotiation, to be honest, after they had done their due diligence.
Nice. Nice. And let's talk about timing real quick because I get questions around this a lot. I'm always really curious, and people are always at different chapters in their life. And I think that timing is a great example of how personal these transactions are behind the scenes. So, what can you share around, why it was the right time for you? I know that investor like pulled out
Hmm.
and really just kind of threw a grenade in this whole process, but
Yeah.
it, just tips wise in general, when is the right time?
I think for me, I was able to see a lot of the headwinds in the industry, to be honest. Like, I don't come from an apparel background, and so I learned that business. But as COVID went on and we saw supply chain issues and rising costs, I could kind of see the writing on the wall, and I felt those pressures from investors as well. Like, inventory heavy businesses are not in vogue right now, right? On demand businesses, if you have a consumer product, are in vogue. And so for me, from a personal timing perspective, I was like, I love business and I like building companies, but this business has a lot of headwinds. So from a timing perspective, I could see how the landscape had changed over the last 7 years. Um, and then, from a timing perspective in the market, it was still a tough market. I mean, it was hard to get financing from their end. That was a big sticking point of whether the deal was going to go through because they had to finance, the acquisition, or the purchase. And so it probably would have gotten a lot smoother had there not been those macro factors at play. Um, but again, the fundamentals of the business, I think, is what helped the deal go through in the end. But there were significant macro headwinds, and it probably would have been easier to do the deal in, at the end of 2023 or even now versus a year ago when there was a lot of uncertainty, and especially in the financial markets.
Yeah, agreed. I think 2022 and 2023 really was created a different breed of entrepreneur for sure. Like that amount of downward pressure on valuations, just a reality check from the
Yeah.
craziness of COVID in 2021. It really, I think the people who came through on the other side are just rock stars basically. Like people made it through
Yeah.
that crazy era. It's remarkable how much pullback there was
Hmm.
from the COVID era. So that takes us to the finale question. Knowing what you know now, what would you
Yeah.
tell yourself 10 years ago?
Um, Stay growth minded, do the right thing as you're building your business. I think there's always opportunities where you feel like you can take advantage of this or grow fast. I think the crux of business is always creating a great product and being a great employer, and creating a great team. And I think those two things will always get you further than taking the fast, I don't know, growth hack way to getting there. And people can see through that. That's what creates value.
Mm, I like that. Being a great employer is
Yeah.
a good takeaway. I really like that. So, what are you working on now?
Yeah. So in the same vein, now I help other companies scale, using a system called EOS. It stands for Entrepreneurial Operating System. And so oftentimes I work with leadership teams that are like 15 people to 250 people. They have a couple $1 million in revenue. They're likely either a generational company or scaling really fast as a startup. And they need to get a lot of those processes in place. And so I help them figure out what their long-term goals are, figure out what their organizational structure looks like. And it's a whole process, that helps you run a business and scale a business very effectively. It's not a framework I particularly used with my own startup, but as I learned more about it, everything I was doing right and how I was running my business on a day to day basis is kind of ingrained in the framework. It's nothing new or genius, but it's just the way it's kind of presented. And so I basically allow business owners or give them the tools and disciplines to run their businesses better, to strategize on a quarterly basis and facilitate those discussions to help them get out of the business and work on the business, which oftentimes is so hard. Um, and help them achieve their goals by kind of implementing these EOS processes that are really cool. So if you've never read the book Traction, that's kind of what the system's based off of. It was written 22 years ago, um, and has been used by over 200 plus private organizations. So if I had to do it again, I'd use that system. It's a really, it takes the guesswork out of all the things that I mentioned that make a company uh, right for sale, like the processes, the vision, the organization, the meeting structure, how you think about priorities within the business. It really kind of creates a structure and a framework to all those things. So oftentimes the system is really exciting and valuable for those that are looking for an exit, or there's some change in leadership or a new family member coming in, whatever those dynamics are. There's been some change. They've either been stagnant or they're growing quickly, and they need to like pull it all together to create a really strong organization that can work as a team to achieve their goals. So
Nice. Very
yeah.
cool. And where can people learn more?
You can learn more at EOS Worldwide. There's 700 implementers around the country. I just happen to be one of them, and we all have kind of been entrepreneurs and now help other business owners.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah,
Wherever you guys are listening on iTunes or Spotify, those links will be in the description. But thank you so much for coming
of
on and
course.
sharing your story.
Yeah, thanks so much, Steve. Appreciate it.